The night she told me I'd forgotten again, her voice sounded rehearsed, not real. It was October 20th, a Friday, and the oven timer dinged like a stage cue as she spoke. I was standing right there in my own kitchen, my late wife's kitchen, Chicago's autumn wind rattling the window glass, the smell of burnt garlic bread hanging in the air. Chloe, my son's wife, tilted her head, lips curled just enough to look sweet. You forgot, Martin, again. Her tone was calm, but it carried the weight of accusation. I hadn't forgotten. I'd written it down. A simple reminder about the electrician's bill on a yellow post-it by the phone. And yet somehow the paper was gone, like so many other things lately. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to that moment. The bill Chloe held in her hand was stamped $1,920, dated October 18th, with the name Keller Electric printed at the top. The thing is, I never called an electrician. The outlets were fine. The breaker box, solid. I knew my bungalow every brick, every beam. I built half of it myself after the factory job dried up. I looked at the invoice, then at Chloe. Who called them? I asked. She blinked twice, feigned confusion. Don't set you remember? You said the lights in the basement were flickering. My jaw clenched. Those lights hadn't flickered once. I slid the bill into my spiral notebook. Page 47. Date October 20th. Entry received electrician bill. Suspected fake. Amount $1,920. I underlined the figure twice. If I was losing my mind, I'd lose it in ink, not in whispers. The gaslighting was subtle at first. A misplaced tool from my workbench. My wrench set, the one my wife gifted me on our 20th anniversary, suddenly missing the 14 mm. A mail key I kept on the counter, gone for 2 days, then reappeared on the coffee table as if I'd dropped it. I knew how memory worked. After my wife died 2 years ago, grief made time blur. But this wasn't blur, this was a pattern. When David, my son, came by on Sunday, Chloe floated the idea of putting my bills on autopay. Dad a bit overloaded, she told him, pouring coffee with that calm accountant sips precision. At his age, it sips too much. At his age. I was 57, not senile. David looked at me, unsure. It might make things easier, Dad. I forced a smile. I'll think about it, but inside I felt the burn. Chloe wasn't just organizing, she was narrating my decline. October turned colder, the Chicago wind cutting sharper through the bungalow's old windows. Each night, after Chloe and David left with my grandson, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my notebook open. I logged everything, time, date, what moved, what vanished, what Chloe said. On October 23rd, I wrote, mailbox left ajar. Mrs. Stein waved from across the street. She looked concerned. On October 27th, received Hillock inquiry letter. I did not request, denied October 29th. Every note was my anchor. One evening, as the radiator hissed, I sat in the dark with my wife's scarf across my lap. Chloe's words echoed in my head. You're overloaded. She'd said it with a little laugh, like she was making a joke, but I knew better. Repetition makes belief, and she repeated it around David, planting seeds. The worst moment came October 30th. I was sorting screws in the garage. Old habit keeps my hands busy when Chloe stepped in with that accountant smile. Martin, you left the garage unlocked again. I found the key just hanging in the door. I stared at her. I never left that door unlocked. Not once in 30 years. I kept that key on a ring with my wife's church fob. I reached into my pocket, and sure enough, the key was gone. Maybe you are tired, she added softly. You said been forgetting. Her voice lingered like the smell of burnt bread. That night I sat at the kitchen table, recorder in hand. My thumb pressed the red button, and in the silence of the bungalow, I whispered, if I dem losing my mind, I still lose it in ink. And if I stem not, then these tapes will outlive her whispers. I still remember the crunch of leaves outside, the way the ring doorbell chimed faintly when David came in late that night. He kissed his son goodnight upstairs. I heard Chloe in the hallway, her tone shifting soft, caring when she spoke to David, but sharp when she glanced at me. Dad forgot again. she murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. I clenched my jaw. I'd written the reminder. I had the log, page 49. October 30th. But in David Sett's eyes I saw doubt flicker. And that doubt, that was her weapon. By Halloween morning, the house no longer felt like mine. My wife's scarf smelled faintly of lavender still, but the bungalow walls carried Chloe's script, forgetful, overloaded, losing it. I held the fake electrician bill one more time. The paper felt too smooth, like it had been printed at her office, not mailed from a company. I placed it inside a manila envelope, sealed it, and scrawled across the front, to be remembered. Because if Chloe was trying to erase me, I wasn't going quietly. By the time the candy bowl sat empty on Halloween, my son's wife had me doubting the hallway light switch I'd installed with my own hands. That's how gaslighting works in a house like mine. You don't wake up to a fire. You wake up to the smell of smoke that no one else admits is there. Monday, October 23rd, Chicago's wind pushed brown leaves into the bungalow's side yard. I walked into the kitchen and stopped at the sight of my reading glasses, perched on top of the fridge like a joke. I always set them on the little ceramic dish by the landline. Always. I picked them up, wiped the dust, and wrote in the spiral, October 23rd, Mon 9:05 a.m., glasses moved from dish to fridge top. Witness none. Paper none. I closed the notebook and stared at the dish like it might tell me who'd touched it. On Tuesday the 24th, an email hit my inbox at 10:14 a.m. Subject line, Action required HELOC pre-approval from a bank I didn't use for the mortgage. I printed the message and stapled it to page 52. The footer said the inquiry originated Sunday night. Sunday night when David and Chloe had stayed late and she'd said auto-pay would avoid accidents. I underlined the timestamp and wrote, I did not request this. The printer spit warm paper like a heartbeat, steady, undeniable. Friday the 27th, David stopped by after work with my grandson Liam. We were on the living room floor assembling the little blue racetrack Liam loves, and he looked up at me with those new-to-the-world eyes. Grandpa, where did my dinosaurs go? Chloe answered from the doorway before I could. He hides them where he feels safe, she said, smiling at me, like I'd misplaced them again. I checked the Ring doorbell later. The afternoon clip showed Chloe carrying a grocery bag in her left hand and a small plastic tote in her right. Hard to tell what was inside. I wrote it down. I write everything down. On Sunday the 29th, I opened a letter. Home equity line of credit denied. The date matched the email thread. David was in the kitchen, warming leftover lasagna. Dad, you look weird. Everything okay? I held the letter in the sunlight like it might change shape. They're saying I applied, I said quietly. He frowned. Maybe it's identity theft? Chloe leaned against the counter, folding a dish towel slowly. That's exactly why autopay and consolidating everything under one portal would help. She said to David as if I wasn't there. He's juggling too much. It's not safe. He nodded halfway. I watched that nod like a man watches his last lifeboat drift. Monday, October 30th. The radiator hissed early. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, older than I felt, and more alone than I'd ever say out loud. My wife's recipe card for her roast chicken sat in the drawer, the one with her smudged thumbprint next to 2 teaspoons dried mustard. I laid it on the table. I could hear her voice in my head. Measure twice, speak once. I pressed the card flat and breathed until my chest stopped buzzing. Then I slid it back into the drawer and wrote on page 57, Emotional weather, heavy fog. That evening, I shuffled into the garage to check my wrench set. The 14mm socket, still missing. I stood there a long time, staring at the empty slot, wondering how far a person has to be pushed before a house stops feeling like a house. Chloe came out with the recycling. Martin, did you forget the garage key in the door again? She asked gently, soft as new snow. I reached into my pocket and felt nothing but lint. Without a word, she reached behind the jamb and produced the key. Found it outside. No big deal, she said, then added to the night air more than to me. You've got a lot on your plate. In the living room, the landline's red light blinked. A new voicemail. I played it later, a pharmacy robocall, reminding me of a refill I'd already picked up. I saved it anyway, labeled it with the date. Everything gets a date. Halloween Tuesday, the doorbell rang every 7 minutes. Pirates and princesses. A miniature firefighter who said, "Thank you, sir," like I was giving him a medal. David carved pumpkins on the porch railing with Liam, and the orange flesh made the sidewalk look like a crime scene. Inside, I reached for the mail key, the one I keep in a little brass bowl, and went still. Gone. Not there. Again, I checked my pockets, the dish, the floor. I checked under the dish like the key could flatten itself to hide. The oven timer dinged, garlic bread again. "Forgetting something?" Chloe asked, fixing the timer with her finger. It was the same tone as October 20th. Rehearsed, not real. I opened the notebook and scribbled so hard the paper nearly tore. October 31st, 2, mail key missing 5:42 p.m. Third time this month. I closed my eyes and willed myself not to say anything I couldn't staple to a page. Wednesday, November 1st, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the HELOC denial letter on my left and the $1,920 Keller electric bill on my right. My pension deposit stub, $1,486 posted on October 1st, sat between them like a small island of truth. Numbers don't love you back, but they don't lie. I stacked the papers, squared the corners, and heard the downstairs door latch click. "Martin," Chloe called sweetly. "Do you want me to set a reminder for your dentist? You missed your last one." I had not. I pulled the magnet off the fridge and pointed to the handwriting that wasn't mine. "Dr. Singh, November 9th, 11:30 a.m. Someone had written it recently. The marker lines still looked shiny. I traced the letters and felt a low tide go out inside my chest. Even my appointments were being rewritten. That afternoon I walked 2 blocks to Mrs. Stein's stoop with an envelope I wasn't mailing. "You look pale," she said, drawing her sweater tight. She's been across the street long enough to know when my gutters need clearing. "Just a lot of administrative weather," I said. She nodded like she understood the language of papers and pressure. "If you want me to watch that mailbox like a hawk, I will," she said. "Not on your lawn, on mine. The angle's better." I thanked her, and when I got home I wrote it down. Mrs. Stein offered mailbox watch. Good line of sight. Thursday, November 2nd. I woke at 4:17 a.m., the kind of wakefulness that isn't about coffee or age, but about a house humming with someone else's story. I made tea and stared at the yellowed edge of my wife's recipe card until the kettle went quiet. Then I pulled my spiral notebook to the center of the table, set a ruler across page 61, and drew a heavy horizontal line. I pressed hard enough to feel the ridge through 3 pages. I drew 4 vertical lines, dividing the space into 5 clean columns, each the width of 2 fingers. I printed the headings slowly. In block letters my wife used to tease me about: date, time, item moved, witness, paper. I turned the notebook so the light from the stove hood fell straight across the words. I wrote a first row to set the standard: November 2nd, Thu, 4:27 a.m., recipe card drawer reopened. No change, witness, none, paper, Nencel. A second row, November 2nd, Thu, 6:08 a.m. Mail key returned to brass bowl, witness, none. Paper ring clip, 6:04 a.m., front door chime. I reached for the Ring app and bookmarked the quiet clip where no one appears, but the chime sounds and the air in the foyer moves like a sleeve brushed the camera. I saved the file title as nov02_0604_ front and felt something in my lungs unlock. By mid-morning, the grid had 5 entries: a coffee mug relocated from the sink to the pantry shelf, a grocery receipt for $28, Jensen's Market, November 1st, 5:12 p.m., folded and slid under my placemat, not my wallet, a decorative bowl turned a 1/4 inch to the right. I measured because now I measure. Every line had a place to live. Every oddness met a box and a label. If the house wanted to lie to me, it would have to learn my handwriting. At noon, David called. "Dad, Chloe's got a friend who can do a financial walkthrough after the anniversary party. No pressure. Just make sure stuff is streamlined." I pressed the phone to my ear and looked at the headings again. "Witness, paper." "Okay," I said. Bring receipts when you come Sunday. Over $200. Staple them. We'll start a binder. Silence cracked on the line. A binder, he said, half laughing. A binder, I repeated, and the word felt like a lock sliding home. By dusk, a calm I didn't trust had settled over the house. The garlic bread smell was gone, replaced by tea and paper and the faint metallic tang of the ruler's edge. I tucked the spiral into the drawer with my wife's card and felt both objects together, the past and the present, rest easy for the first time in weeks. The collapse hadn't ended, but now it had borders. I clicked the landline's red light and saved the newest nothing message, then stood in the kitchen with my palm flat on the drawer. You can call it forgetting, I told the empty room, but I'll call it Tuesday. And on Thursday, November 2nd, I called it a grid. Halloween night should have been for pumpkins and kids in costumes, but for me it became the night I sealed my first envelope against my daughter-in-law's whispers. The trick wasn't candy, it was survival. I walked 2 blocks through cold October air, carrying a manila envelope under my arm. Inside was the $1,920 Keller Electric bill, stapled to a page from my notebook. On the page I'd written, in block letters, October 20th. Received, suspected false, witness none. The paper felt heavier than paper should. At Ruth Delgado's door, the porch light glowed orange. Ruth had been my neighbor for 15 years, a paralegal who'd helped me once with a minor zoning dispute, after I retired from the foreman's job. She opened the door in a Cubs sweatshirt. Martin? On Halloween? I handed her the envelope. I need this notarized, sealed, today. She didn't laugh or ask why. She just nodded, slid on her reading glasses, and said, You want me to sign across the flap? Yes. And date it. Her pen scratched October 31st, 2023. She pressed her seal into the corner, and I swear the stamp sounded louder than the kids yelling trick or treat down the block. Walking home, I felt the first layer of armor slide over me. If Chloe wanted shadows, I'd bring flashlights. On Friday, November 3rd, I called Frank Morales, an old crew buddy who now worked as a locksmith. You still keep receipts, Frank? I asked. Always, he said. What sips up? My back door locks has been tampered with. Frank came by that afternoon in his blue van. The November wind rattled the dry sycamore leaves as he crouched over the back door. He whistled low. See that? He pointed to tiny scratch marks around the tumbler. Someone sipped's been in here with the wrong key or a pick. My stomach clenched. Could it be me? Forgetting? He shook his head. Not unless you stir filing steel with your fingernails. Frank swapped out the lock, scribbled an invoice for $246, dated November 3rd, 2023. I tucked the white slip into my spiral. Page 64. On the bottom margin, I wrote Frank Morales confirms tampering. Witness himself, paper, invoice. That night, Chloe breezed in with my son and grandson, carrying takeout. You really should stop fiddling with those old locks, she said, handing David a napkin like it was proof. It sets dangerous when doors don't set close right. I didn't answer. I had Frank's invoice in my pocket like a stone in a slingshot. By Sunday, November 5th, I'd started photographing every object Chloe touched. A bowl turned, a coaster shifted, a grocery receipt slid under the mat. My old Nikon from the foreman days clicked steady, each photo tagged with the date and hour. Dad, you're on a photo kick again? David asked when he noticed the camera. Just documenting the house. I said, calm. Weather, repairs, little things. He shrugged. Chloe smiled, the kind of smile that says he's harmless. But that same night, I pressed record on the little Sony handheld I'd bought back when I was supervising apprentices. I set it on the shelf above the phone, red light blinking. At 9:47 p.m., while I rinsed plates, Chloe said softly to David in the hallway, Your father misplaced the receipt again. I dried my hands and wrote the time down in the grid. November 5th, 9:47 p.m. Accusation receipt, witness, recorder. Paper audio file 110523_947. On November 6th, I knocked on Mrs. Steinasp's door. She adjusted her wool scarf and said, I seen someone by your mailbox more than once. Red scarf, mid-30s. Not a mail carrier. My pulse quickened. Can you log it, just the date and time? She nodded, pulling a small spiral from her apron pocket. I still keep a column. Best I'll leave it in the window if you need to copy. By then I had a rhythm. Notebook grid entries. Photos with timestamps. Audio recordings labeled by date. Neighbors as witnesses. Every shadow had a shape. Chloe's motives began to show themselves in the cracks. On November 8th, she mentioned over dinner that responsible people refinance before the market shifts. She tapped her wine glass as if to punctuate her point. David nodded but didn't commit. I watched the reflection of her face in the glass cabinet door. She wanted more than safety. She wanted control, and she wanted the credit for it. I excused myself, went to the den and whispered into the recorder. She needs to look responsible. Status, not safety. If she erases me, she gets both the house and the narrative. Note for December 14th. That week, while Chloe pressed harder about finances, I was already sketching the outline of her undoing. On the notepad, I drew a calendar grid from October 20th to December 14th, every day accounted for. At the bottom, I wrote holiday dinner, 3rd anniversary, RSVP list due November 15th, DJ Locke's toasts. The idea came quietly. If she wanted to erase me privately, I would let the truth surface publicly under lights, with witnesses with her own words played back, not shouted, not fought over the kitchen sink. Just revealed. On November 10th, at the caterer Sep's office, I paid the deposit for their anniversary dinner. The receipt, $300, November 10th. Caterer Sepsis check hash 1984 went straight into a red folio labeled December 14th. When the clerk asked, "Will you be giving a toast, Mr. Hale?" I smiled and said, "I sept like to be first, just to keep things tidy." Back home, I noted in the ledger November 10th, secured toast slot. First speaker DJ confirmed. By the time the first snow dusted the sidewalks on November 12th, my house was no longer a fog of confusion. It was a case file. Every drawer, every lock, every paper had a place. Chloe still whispered to David about my memory, still shifted objects by inches, but now each move landed in a box, a photo, or a log. I wasn't collapsing anymore. I was building scaffolding, and on the highest beam of that scaffolding, in neat handwriting, was the reminder, December 14th. Anniversary dinner, mic test. I closed my spiral on that date and whispered to the empty kitchen. If she wants applause, I let the room decide who claps. 3 nights later, Chloe leaned against the counter, swirling her wine. David and I were talking about meeting with a financial planner. It might help your dad feel less stressed. Her tone was sugar-coated but vague. No names, no credentials. Just planner. David looked at me. Wouldn't that hurt, right? I sipped my coffee. Depends who this planner is. If it sets a friend, then it sets not a planner, it sets a pitch. Chloe sipped, smile froze. Why are you so suspicious, Martin? We're sure just trying to help. I tapped the notebook where I'd already written November 13th, 2. Chloe suggests planner. No name, no license. Witness David, paper none. By then, even David was starting to notice cracks. On November 14th, he came into the garage where I was oiling my tools. "Dad," he said slowly, "did you ask Chloe about the decorator receipt?" I wiped my hands. "Which one?" "She said she paid for centerpieces for the dinner, but when I asked to see the invoice, she couldn't find it." I nodded once. "Then it doesn't exist." The silence between us was heavy. For the first time, he didn't argue. He just rubbed the back of his neck and said, "She's probably just misplacing stuff." But his voice lacked conviction. I logged it that night, November 14th. Wed, David questions missing decorator receipt. Witness self, paper none. That Friday, I met Ruth at her kitchen table. She notarized another envelope, this one containing Frank's locksmith invoice and a fresh set of photographs. "You're building a case file," she said, tapping her seal. "Not for court," I replied. "For the truth." Her eyebrow arched. Sometimes those are the same thing. On November 15th, I invited Teresa, a notary Ruth trusted, over for tea. I laid out my spiral notebook, the HELOC denial, the Keller electric bill, Frank's invoice, and my timeline of notes. Teresa flipped through each page carefully, her pen scratching signatures across the bottom margins. "This is thorough," she said. "It has to be," I answered. "Chloe doesn't set argue facts. She argues fog. I need a map." I slipped Teresa's signed statement into the red folio, alongside the RSVP list for the anniversary dinner. Every page had a tab now. Every page had a date. Meanwhile, Frank installed hinge bolts on the back door to reinforce the new lock. His invoice, November 16th, $184. I stapled it directly into the spiral. Chloe came home that night, jangling her keys. "What's all this work on the doors, Martin? Feeling paranoid?" she asked lightly. I smiled back. "No, just making sure the house stays mine." She laughed, but her eyes sharpened for a second, like I'd cracked through the mask. On November 18th, I sat in the living room, recorder balanced on my knee. The radiator clanged, the streetlights buzzed, and Chloe Sepp's voice drifted from the kitchen as she told David, "Your father is overwhelmed. It's not fair to put all this on him." I whispered into the recorder. She repeats the same script, forgetful, overloaded. Stressed, but stress doesn't set move tools or write fake bills. That Sepp's intent. I tucked the recorder into my shirt pocket, stood and walked back into the kitchen. Chloe's smile froze again. Just for a beat. She knew I'd heard. By the end of November, the ledger was thick. My red folio bulged with notarized envelopes, invoices, photographs, and witness notes. Every time Chloe nudged an object, I nudged closer to December 14th. And one night, as I closed the spiral, I whispered into my phone, calm and steady. "I once sat argue with shadows. I set measure light." By the first week of December, my house wasn't just a home anymore. It was an archive. Every receipt had a staple mark. Every lock had a date. Every word had an echo saved somewhere. Chloe thought she was tightening her grip. She didn't know I was already stacking bricks for the wall that would stop her. December 2nd, Saturday. I withdrew $420 from the ATM at Jensen's Market. Chloe had insisted we needed extra decor cash for the anniversary party. I asked for a receipt, folded it, and stapled it into my spiral on page 79. Withdrawal $420, code decor, witness ATM camera. Paper slip stapled. That night, Chloe announced brightly, "Dawn set worry, Martin. I found the mail key." She held it up like a magician pulling a rabbit. "It must have slipped behind the sofa." I forced a smile. "Good eye, Chloe. Thanks for keeping track." What she didn't realize was that the Ring audio picked up every word. You could even hear the jingle of the brass key as she set it back in the bowl. I labeled the file dex02_815 PM_key return. Later, I whispered into my recorder. She returned it once she knew it was documented. That Sepp's not forgetfulness. That Sepp's staging. December 4th. David sat across from me at the table, frowning at the bank statements I'd laid out. "Dad, some of these don't match." He tapped one line, a boutique purchase for $312 at a store Chloe swore she hadn't been to in months. Another $87 for a delivery service they didn't use. "Receipts?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "She just said not to worry." I leaned forward. "David, if it sets not on paper, it didn't set happen. You set'll see soon." For the first time, his eyes didn't dart to her defense. He just nodded once, slow. That same week, Ruth drafted a polite letter on her paralegal letterhead, an accounting demand. The wording was simple. All expenses related to the anniversary dinner must be documented with receipts over $200 payable by December 12th. She handed me 2 copies, one to deliver and one to seal. "Think she said'll comply?" Ruth asked. I folded the letter. "No, and that refusal will be its own answer." The DJ confirmed my toast slot on December 6th. "You'll be first up after dinner," he told me over the phone. I wrote the detail down in block letters. DJ Martin first toast, December 14th, 7:30 p.m. Then I underlined it 3 times. The irony made me smile. Chloe thought she was planning a celebration, What she was really planning was her own cross-examination. By December 7th, Chloe had grown bolder. She stood at the counter, phone in hand, telling David, "I'll handle the finances after the refinance. It's just easier if Martin isn't in the middle." She didn't even lower her voice. She thought no one believed me, not even my son. But David's shoulders stiffened. He didn't answer, and I wrote in the grid December 7th, overheard Chloe. Witness David silent. Paper audio file 120723 underscore 655 p.m. Her arrogance wasn't stealth, it was entitlement. She believed neighbors didn't notice her at the mailbox, believed David wouldn't question missing receipts, believed her charm could smooth every wrinkle. She didn't see the net pulling tight. On December 9th, I invited Teresa the notary again. We sat at the dining table while Liam played with his toy trucks on the rug. Teresa notarized the latest set of photographs, engraved flutes, hinge bolt invoice, and the ATM slip stapled to page 79. Each page received her looping signature in the heavy press of her seal. "Martin," she said softly, "you have more documentation than most lawsuits I've seen." "Good," I replied. "Because I sent not suing anyone, I sent showing them what they already know." December deepened, and with it, Chloe Sepp's overconfidence. She strutted through the kitchen like the queen of a house she didn't Sepp own. When I asked where the decorator Sepson's own voice was, she laughed. "Oh, Martin, you really don't need to see every little thing. It steps exhausting." I smiled, calm. "Then show me just one over 200 anything." Her cheeks flushed. "I don't have to prove myself to you." I clicked the recorder in my pocket. December 11th, refusal to provide receipts. Witness, self, paper. Audio file 121123 underscore 915 AM. By December 12th, Ruth's deadline had come and gone. No receipts, no binder. Chloe didn't even acknowledge the letter. She thought silence was safety. But silence, notarized and witnessed, becomes proof. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, red folio open. Keller electric bill, October 20th. Halo denial, Oct 29. Locksmith invoice, November 3rd. ATM slip, Det 2. Notarized statement from Teresa, multiple dates. Ruth's demand letter ignored. I shuffled the papers into a clean sequence. Each page told the same story: gaslight, deny, erase. On December 13th, the night before the anniversary dinner, I stood in the quiet kitchen with my wife's scarf looped around my hand. Snow drifted past the window, settling over Chicago like a clean sheet of paper. I whispered into my recorder, steady as ever. "She thinks tomorrow is her stage. She doesn't know it two's mine. She wrote the script, but I control the microphone." I slid the red folio into my briefcase and locked the latch. The next move was hers, but the reveal would be mine. December in Chicago has a way of making silence loud. Snow dulls the streets, muffles the cars, and amplifies every sound inside a house. That's when I caught her. It was December 8th, Friday night. Nearly 10 p.m. I had just finished logging the thermostat setting 71, where I always keep it in winter, when I heard her voice drifting from the hallway. Chloe was on the phone, her tone sharper than the syrup she used around David. "After the refinance, it sets easier if he isn't set living there." My hand froze on the notebook. I underlined the date and time, then wrote word for word December 8th, 9:52 p.m. Overheard Chloe. "Refinance plan contingent on me out of house." Witness self, paper audio file 120823 underscore 952 p.m. I clicked the recorder off and stared at the page. She wasn't just whispering doubts anymore. She was planning my erasure like it was a line item on a spreadsheet. On December 9th, Saturday morning, Chloe came into the kitchen with a folder tucked under her arm. After the party, she said casually, "I sept like you to meet with a friend of mine. She sept's great with finances. She sept's he'll help us do a walkthrough." David perked up. "Who is she?" Chloe waved her hand like it didn't matter. "Just a friend. She knows her way around numbers." I put my coffee down and asked, "Is she licensed? Certified?" Chloe Sip's eyes narrowed just for a flicker. "You scepter overthinking this, Martin. It seps about convenience." I logged it December 9th, 9:14 a.m. Chloe announces financial walkthrough with friend, no license disclosed, witness David, paper none. That afternoon, David helped me clear the driveway of snow. He leaned on his shovel, breath fogging in the cold. "Dad, I don't know. Some of this doesn't add up. She said she paid the decorator, but—" His voice trailed off. "But you never saw a receipt," I finished. He looked at me, startled, then nodded. "Right." I met his eyes and said calmly, "Then you still see it soon." The shovel clanged against the curb. That sound echoed in my bones. December 10th, Sunday. Mrs. Stein knocked on my door, cheeks red from the wind. She held her spiral notebook, a red scarf tucked in the binding. "Martin." I saw her again. "That same woman, red scarf, by your mailbox." This time it was 3:22 in the afternoon. She didn't take anything, just fiddled and walked off. I copied the entry into my own spiral. December 10th, 3:22 p.m. Mailbox tampering. Red scarf woman. Witness, Mrs. Stein. Paper, her log. Chloe had grown arrogant. She assumed neighbors didn't pay attention. She assumed an old man's word weighed less than her smile. But now even the street was recording her. On December 11th, I sat in the living room with the recorder hidden in my lap. David and Chloe argued softly in the kitchen. She said she paid the decorator. "David, why do you keep asking?" Chloe's voice was tight. "Because," David snapped back. "You said you paid with cash, then with check, then with a card. Which is it?" A long silence, then the sound of a cupboard closing. I whispered into the mic. December 11th, overheard Chloe's conflicting claims. Witness David. Paper audio file 121123_807 p.m. That night, David came to me while Chloe was upstairs. "Dad, I'm starting to think you said been right." I didn't gloat. I just placed the red folio on the table between us. "You said'll know for sure soon." By December 12th, tension clung to the house like smoke. Chloe busied herself with lists and calls, but her tone was brittle. When Ruth's accounting letter went unanswered, it wasn't a gap anymore, it was a verdict. On December 13th, the eve of their anniversary dinner, Chloe floated through the kitchen rehearsing. I watched her from the hallway mirror. 3 years married, and we've built a home filled with love, she said to herself, holding a wine glass. Her reflection smiled back at her like a co-conspirator. She didn't see me watching. She didn't hear me whisper. Tomorrow the microphone tells the truth. That night I laid everything out on the dining table. The Keller electric bill, $1,920. The HELOC denial letter, October 29th. Frank Sip's locksmith invoice, November 3rd. The ATM slip, December 2nd. Ruth's demand letter, unanswered. Teresa Estes notarized pages. Mrs. Stein Sip's red scarf log. I lined them up like soldiers, then sealed them back into their envelopes. The red folio was heavier now, not just with paper but with weight. Snow tapped against the window. My wife Sips's scarf hung on the chair. I ran my hand over the fabric and whispered, "Tomorrow you shall be in the room too." By the morning of December 14th, I wasn't nervous. I was steady. Chloe thought she had a stage. She didn't realize I had a script and every line was hers. December 14th. Chicago dressed itself in silver frost that morning, the kind that settles on railings and turns every breath into smoke. I rose before dawn, brewed coffee, and set the red folio on the table like a weapon polished for battle. I touched each envelope one last time. The Keller electric bill, the HELOC denial letter, Frank's locksmith invoice, the ATM slip, Ruth's unanswered demand, Teresa's notarized margins, and Mrs. Stein's log. Together, they weren't just paper, they were my sanity bound in ink. At 5:45 p.m., David came to pick me up. He wore a pressed suit, Liam's crayon doodle tucked into his breast pocket. He didn't say much, just glanced at the folio in my hand and nodded. The banquet hall in Logan Square glittered with string lights. A soft jazz trio warmed the room. Guests chatted over cocktails, coats piled on a rack near the door. I took in the scene like a foreman surveying a work site, every corner noted, every fixture steady. Chloe floated through the crowd in a dark green dress, pearls at her neck, charm on her lips. She laughed with the caterer, shook hands with David's colleagues, kissed Mrs. Stein on the cheek as if she hadn't stolen glances at her mailbox. She moved like a hostess born for spotlight. But tonight wasn't at hers. Dinner was roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and a centerpiece of white lilies supposedly paid for by Chloe, though no receipt ever surfaced. I chewed slowly, watching the table glimmer under soft chandeliers. The DJ gave me a nod from the corner, then tapped his mic. First toast of the evening, Mr. Martin Hale. Chloe's head whipped slightly, her smile still plastered on. She hadn't expected me to go first. I stood, steady as the beams I'd once laid in skyscrapers. The room hushed. Forks clinked down. 3 years of marriage, I began. My voice low but clear is something to celebrate. It sets a foundation, and foundations, they matter. I let the pause hang just long enough. Then I reached into the folio and pulled out the first envelope. I held up the Keller electric bill. On October 20th, I was told I septed the forgotten again. Vivid that I septed called an electrician for a flickering basement light. That never happened. I opened the envelope, slid the paper out, and passed it to David. $1,920. Fake. Logged. October 20th, 9:12 p.m. My notebook has it. My neighbor notarized it. It sits dated, sealed, and signed. A murmur ran through the room. Chloe's smile faltered. Next I laid down the HELOC denial letter. October 29th. A loan inquiry I never made. The bank says I applied. I didn't set, but the letter sets, real. And so is the date. Then the locksmith invoice, November 3rd. Frank Morales confirmed tampering, not paranoia, scratches on the tumbler. Invoice in his handwriting, witnessed. I unfolded the ATM slip, December 2nd. Chloe said we needed decor money. I withdrew $420. The slip says so, what doesn't exist? A single receipt of where it went. The room went colder than the snow outside. Chloe tried to laugh, light and airy. Martin, you stir confused. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded to the DJ. He pressed play. From the speakers came Chloe Sip's own voice, soft but sharp. After the refinance, it sets is easier if he isn't set a living there. Gasps rippled across the tables. David's head jerked toward her, eyes wide, jaw set. Another clip followed. Your father misplaced the receipt again. I stamped, worried. Then, it's not safe for him to juggle so much. Autopay would avoid accidents. The words filled the hall like smoke. Chloe's hand trembled around her glass. I turned to Mrs. Stein. Would you mind? She stood, gray scarf around her shoulders, and spoke with the clarity of someone who had nothing to lose. I saw a woman at his mailbox, red scarf, mid-30s. 3 times, not a postal worker. The silence afterward was absolute. Chloe Sip's voice broke. This is insane. He sips confused. He sips making it all up. Ruth stepped forward from the back, holding her paralegal pad. The demand letter for receipts went unanswered, Mrs. Hale. Failure to respond is an answer of its own. Chloe Sip's face flushed crimson. I didn't sit gloat. I didn't sit sneer. I simply placed the last sealed envelope on the table and slid it toward David. These are notarized timelines. Sealed by Ruth and Teresa. If you open them, you set'll see every entry lined up, day by day. I kept records, because I won set be erased. David stared at the envelope, then slowly opened it. His eyes scanned the pages, his fingers tracing the signatures. When he finally looked up, his expression had hardened into something Chloe had never seen. This was never about winning, I said quietly. It was about remembering, about keeping the house, the family, and myself intact. I raised my glass, not to Chloe, not to David, but to the truth, to memory, and to paper that doesn't set lie. No one clapped, they didn't need to. Chloe sat frozen, wine trembling in her hand, while the truth rang louder than any toast. The clink of my glass still hung in the air when Chloe broke the silence. This, this isn't set legal, she snapped, her voice higher than I set ever heard it. You can just play recordings of private conversations. Her hands shook, pearls rattling against the stem of her glass. Ruth stood calm at the back, pen in hand. Actually, Illinois is a two-party consent state for new recordings, but Martin notified witnesses, documented dates, and secured notarized logs. This wasn't set spying, it was record-keeping. The room buzzed with murmurs. Guests glanced between Chloe and the stack of papers laid bare on the table. David set the envelope down slowly, his hand flat against it like he was pinning the truth in place. His voice was low, tight. Why didn't you tell me first, Dad? I looked him in the eye. Because if I told you, you set to defend her. I needed you to see before you chose sides. His jaw flexed, his eyes dark. She said she paid vendors I never saw. She told me you were slipping. I let the silence answer for me. Chloe laughed too loudly, the sound brittle. You started letting him manipulate you, David. Look at him. He's obsessed with notes and binders like some paranoid old man. David pushed the papers toward her. Then why can you show me a single receipt? Just one. Over $200. Where the decorator invoice, the florist, the planner you keep talking about. Chloe Sip's lips parted, but no words came. Ruth cleared her throat, her paralegal voice steady. The accounting demand was due December 12th. Nothing was delivered. That failure to comply is, itself, evidence. The party, once a celebration, shifted into something colder. The jazz trio stopped mid-song. Guests whispered, some excused themselves early. Plates of roast chicken sat half-eaten, champagne glasses untouched. Mrs. Stein shook her head softly. I warned you, Chloe, mailboxes don't lie. Chloe Sip's face drained of color. You are all against me. This is a witch hunt. No, I said, calm as snowfall. This is a reckoning. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. His voice cracked as he looked at her. You told me my father was losing it. You told me I had to protect Liam from his forgetfulness. You lied to me about my own dad. Tears welled in his eyes, but his hands stayed clenched. How could you? Chloe Sip's answer was silence. I closed the folio slowly, slid it back under my arm. I'm not here to ruin anyone. I'm here to keep my name, my house, and my mind. If that ruins you, Chloe, you did it yourself. She stared at me with something between rage and fear. She wanted to scream, to claw, but the weight of every notarized seal pinned her down. By the time coffee was poured, the dinner had become a tribunal. Guests asked quiet questions of Ruth, of Mrs. Stein, of Frank the locksmith. Chloe sat stiff, arms crossed, refusing every glance. David didn't touch his plate. The champagne remained unopened, the flutes still dry. The anniversary had turned into an autopsy. And Chloe's silence, her refusal to sign Ruth's memo or provide a single receipt, was its own verdict. When the last guest left, David lingered by the table, eyes heavy. She burned the bridge herself, he muttered. I laid a hand on his shoulder. No, she built it. All I did was shine a light so you could see where it led. He didn't answer, but he didn't move away either. That night, as snow fell thick outside the banquet hall, I carried the folio to the car. Chloe trailed behind, her heels clicking sharp against the tile, each step sounding less certain than the last. The party was supposed to be her stage. Instead, it became her sentencing. And the sentence was silence. The morning after the dinner, the snow on North Avenue looked fresh, untouched, like nothing had happened. But inside our family, nothing was untouched anymore. At 9:15 a.m., December 15th, David and I walked into First Midwest Bank together. The same branch where Chloe had whispered about refinancing, the same branch that had mailed me a HELOC denial I never requested. The branch manager, a woman named Alvarez, greeted us with polite caution. I set the red folio on her desk, its brass clasp catching the morning light. We used to here to verify accounts, I said. My voice even, every line item, every inquiry in person. No more digital fog. David unfolded Ruth's memo and slid it across the table. We need to make sure nothing moved under my wife's name without consent. His jaw tightened when he said my wife. Alvarez tapped at her keyboard, pulled up the accounts. Within 10 minutes, she confirmed, no funds withdrawn, no loans processed. Only attempts. Someone initiated applications but failed verification, she said carefully. David leaned back, exhaling like a man realizing the rope around his neck wasn't knotted yet. I wrote in the spiral, December 15th, 9:42 a.m. Bank confirms no funds moved. Attempts only. Witness Alvarez. Paper branch printout signed. That afternoon, Ruth mailed the certified demand letter with tracking. I watched her slip it into the blue USPS bin. Delivery confirmation in 48 hours, she said. She set L have to sign. But Chloe never signed. Silence again became her only answer. Meanwhile, Frank came by on December 16th with a new lock for the mailbox. He drilled into the cold metal, fitted the cylinder, and handed me 2 fresh brass keys. Invoice $62, dated December 16th. I stapled it directly to page 91. No more red scarf strangers, Frank said. I nodded. Only the right hands on my mail now. On December 18th, David sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the folio. Dad, I need to start fresh. No more blind trust. From now on, we do Sunday ledgers together. Every expense over $200, receipts stapled, binder updated. His words were steady, like mine had been for weeks. For the first time, his tone matched mine. We shook hands over the spiral, father and son, a contract written in ink and trust. By December 20th, word had traveled beyond the family. Chloe's accounting firm called David to clarify a few expense reports she had submitted. The firm had noticed irregular invoices, small but suspicious. Status had been her prize. Exposure was her punishment. David hung up the phone and looked at me. Her boss asked about a $780 vendor invoice. He said the numbers looked wrong. I nodded, calm. Numbers don't lie. People do. Christmas week, instead of arguments, we had ledgers. Liam sat at the table drawing dinosaurs while David and I sorted receipts into a green binder labeled family accounts. I flipped through one page after another, each receipt clear, each entry honest, no whispers, no staged forgetfulness, just paper that spoke plainly. This isn't set revenge, I said quietly to David. This is repair. On December 28th, Ruth called with news. Chloe had refused delivery of the certified letter. That refusal is admissible, she said. In a legal setting, silence carries weight. I logged it on page 96, December 28th. Chloe refused certified letter. Witness, Ruth, paper, USPS, tracking. Justice didn't arrive with a gavel. It arrived in steady corrections. Bank accounts verified. No theft completed. Mailbox secured. Expenses tracked. Receipts stapled. Employer inquiries circling Chloe Sip's shadow games. It wasn't dramatic. It was systemic. And that's how justice lasts. Quiet, documented, airtight. One Sunday in January, David closed the binder after our ledger session and said, I should have believed you sooner. I poured him coffee. Belief isn't debt owed. Proof is. That's why I built the proof. He nodded, eyes steady. We still keep doing this. Every week. I smiled faintly. Justice isn't set a moment, son. That's the system. Snow fell steady on North Avenue, January 5th, layering the sidewalks in silence. I sat by the front window of my bungalow, coffee steaming in my hand, watching flakes drift past the lamp post. The house, my wife's house, no longer felt like a stage for whispers. It felt solid again. I pulled open the drawer where I kept her old recipe card, the one smudged with mustard powder. I ran my thumb across her handwriting. Measure twice, speak once. She used to tell me that whenever I rushed through repairs, I realized it wasn't about carpentry, it was about life. I had measured carefully, line by line, entry by entry, and when the time came to speak, I didn't need to raise my voice. David sat across from me at the table, the green binder between us. Liam played on the rug with his dinosaurs, roaring and clashing them together. David flipped through the binder slowly. You were right, he said finally. If you hadn't written it all down, I would have kept defending her. I sipped my coffee, let the warmth spread. Forgiveness is a door we unlock, I said softly. Boundaries are the hinges. Without them, the door just falls over. He looked at me, eyes tired but softer than I had seen in months. So you stir saying we don't have to hate her. Just stop her. Exactly, I replied. Justice isn't set at cruelty. It's set its clarity. That week I repaired the front threshold of the bungalow. The wood had splintered from years of salt and boots. As I cut the new piece to fit, I hummed an old tune my wife used to love. The sawdust clung to my coat, but the board slid perfectly into place, square, firm, no gaps. When I nailed it down, I thought, this is what repair feels like, not revenge, repair. Inside, I hung my wife's scarf on the hallway peg, a symbol that her presence still steadied me. On the desk, I labeled a fresh red folio. You remember. Inside, I placed my spiral notebook, the recordings, the notarized pages. Not as weapons anymore, but as testimony that I hadn't imagined the storm. One evening, David asked, do you ever regret it? Going that far? Keeping records like a detective? I looked at him and smiled faintly. No, because the alternative was to vanish inside my own house. You didn't lose me, son. She tried to erase me, but I walked back under my own name. He nodded, his eyes glinting in the lamplight. As January deepened, the snow piled higher, but inside warmth returned. The radiator hissed steady, the notebook stayed closed more often, and my reflection in the kitchen window didn't look like a man doubting his own mind anymore. It looked like a man who measured twice, spoke once, and held his ground. 2 months later, the snow had melted into gray slush along the curbs of Chicago, but the air inside my bungalow carried something lighter. Not freedom exactly, just steadiness. On February 20th, David and I walked into the community trade school together. The receptionist looked surprised when we handed her a check for $1,920, the same amount Chloe had once tried to siphon through that fake Keller electric bill. Is it in my wife Sep's name? I told her, scholarship fund for apprentices in construction. David stood beside me, shoulders square. For the first time in years, I saw pride in his eyes, not pity. Liam tugged at his sleeve, holding a plastic dinosaur. Grandpa's helping builders, he said, grinning. I bent down, ruffled his hair. That's Sep's right, buddy. Builders like your grandpa used to be. Life didn't snap back to perfect, but it became orderly. Every Sunday evening, David and I sat at the table with the green binder open, receipts stapled, expenses logged, over $200? Staple, sign, date. Liam would scribble dinosaurs on the margins, and sometimes Ruth stopped by with cookies, shaking her head at how domestic our tribunal had become. And Chloe? She came sometimes. Quieter now, subdued. She sat through ledger nights with her arms crossed, sliding receipts across the table without commentary. She didn't apologize, maybe she never would. But her arrogance had drained away. Every receipt she handed over was an admission, silent but clear. Her workplace, I later heard, had flagged 2 of her expense reports. Nothing criminal, just enough to clip her wings. She stayed employed, but the whispers about numbers not adding up followed her. Status was what she craved most. Status became the thing she lost. One evening, David sighed after she left the table early. I don't know if the marriage will last. I closed the binder gently. Then at one set houses fall when foundations crack. You can patch them for a while, but patchwork isn't set permanence. He nodded slowly. At least I see it now. In March, I planted a cedar sapling in the backyard with Liam. The earth was still half frozen, but we pressed the roots in deep, our gloves muddy. This tree'll outlive me, I told him. Outlive me too? He asked, his cheeks red from the cold. I smiled. Maybe, but it'll remember us. Trees always remember. That night, I wrote a note to myself on plain white paper, sealed it in an envelope, and mailed it to my own address. On the front, I wrote, "Future me, believe your notes." Because one day, if memory failed me, I wanted proof that memory isn't just what lives in the brain, it's what you record, what you staple, what you protect. Closure didn't arrive with applause. It arrived with quiet, a binder, a scholarship fund, a cedar sapling, small, square, sturdy things. And in that steadiness, I realized something: revenge had never been the point. The point was survival. Survival with my dignity intact. Survival with truth written down so it couldn't be erased.